In a forgotten corner of the kingdom, where the streets were shrouded in mist and the air smelled of damp stone and smoke, Dante stood at the edge of the ruined city. His gaze swept across the dark horizon, the last traces of twilight fading as the moon rose high. The city was once a place of wealth and power, a place where Dante had been a prince. Now it was a prison, a reminder of all that had been stolen from him. Dante was a man broken by betrayal, his soul scarred by the past. Once a prince, the heir to a powerful kingdom, he had lost everything when the royal family turned on him. Accused of crimes he had not committed, betrayed by those he had loved, he had been cast out, his name erased from history. But in the shadows, Dante had risen again. The kingdom had forgotten him, but the world of darkness had embraced him. He was now the leader of the Crows, a ruthless mafia syndicate that controlled the underworld with an iron fist. His reputation was built on fear and blood, and he was known as the man who could break anyone. Yet despite the power he wielded, there was a hollow emptiness inside him, a void that no amount of wealth or control could fill. He buried it under layers of coldness, but it remained gnawing at him, always present. It was in this hollow silence that Isolde arrived. She was a woman like no other, mysterious and beautiful, with eyes that seemed to pierce through Dante's hardened exterior. He had heard whispers about her before, rumors that she was tied to the royal family, the very family that had betrayed him. But he didn't care about rumors, not until she walked into his office one fateful evening. Isolde appeared like a ghost, her presence soft yet undeniable. She wore a cloak that shimmered with an otherworldly gleam, and her long dark hair framed her face like a shadow. Her eyes, though, were the thing that drew Dante in. They were filled with sorrow, with a quiet fire that made his chest tighten. Dante. She spoke his name like a secret, the syllables hanging in the air between them. He looked up from his desk, his gaze cold and unyielding. "I don't take visitors," he said, his voice a low growl. But Isolde wasn't just any visitor. She stepped forward, the soft click of her boots against the stone floor echoing in the silence. She didn't flinch under his gaze, and there was something in her expression that made Dante pause. "I need your help," she said, her voice steady, though there was a tremor in it that Dante caught. He raised an eyebrow. "And why would I help you?" His tone was dismissive, but inside something stirred. "I'm not asking for myself," she replied. "I'm asking for my family." Dante leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Your family? What's left of them?" Isolde didn't flinch at his harsh words. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "My family was destroyed, betrayed. My father, my mother, all of them. They were murdered by those who sought power. I need to know who did it." A shadow crossed Dante's face at the mention of betrayal, but he masked it quickly. "Why come to me? What do I have to do with your family?" "Because the people who are responsible are the same ones who destroyed you," she said, her voice quiet but intense. The words hit Dante like a physical blow. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he felt the anger he had buried for so long rise up again. The royal family, the ones who had betrayed him, cast him out like an animal. Could it be that they had done the same to her? To her family? "Who are you?" Dante asked, his voice dangerously calm. Isolde met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm the daughter of King Elric and Queen Lysandra." Dante froze. The name King Elric sent a wave of fury crashing through him, but he swallowed it down, forcing himself to stay in control. The royal family, the family he had once been a part of, had betrayed him. He knew it. And now this woman, this princess, was standing before him asking for his help. "What do you want from me?" Dante asked, his voice low and filled with suspicion. "Help me find the truth," she said. "Help me find the ones who murdered my family. Help me bring them to justice." Dante studied her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. There was something about her, something that felt familiar, something that tugged at the corner of his heart. She wasn't like the others who came to him for favors, for power, for control. No, there was something genuine in her plea. But Dante had never been a man for noble causes. He had spent years building his empire in the shadows, far from the ideals of justice and righteousness. But something about Isolde was different. He didn't know what it was, but he couldn't look away from her. "Why should I care?" he asked, though the question felt empty even to him. Isolde took a deep breath, and for the first time her walls seemed to falter. "Because I know who you really are, Dante," she said softly. "I know you didn't deserve what they did to you. I know the pain of betrayal." Dante's heart skipped a beat at her words. The pain of betrayal. It was a wound that ran deeper than any knife. And somehow this woman, this stranger, had seen it. "I don't need your sympathy," Dante growled, his voice harsh again. "I'm not offering you sympathy," she replied. "I'm offering you a chance for revenge." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Revenge. It was the only thing Dante had lived for in the years since his exile. But something in him hesitated. Was it enough? Isolde stepped forward again, closing the distance between them. "The ones who did this to you, they're still alive. They're still in power. I want to bring them down. Together." For the first time in years, Dante felt a flicker of something long buried. Hope. But he buried it quickly, not allowing himself to entertain the thought. He was a man of vengeance, not hope. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "This isn't some fairy tale. There are no happy endings." "I don't care about fairy tales," Isolde replied fiercely. "I care about justice." Dante looked at her, his eyes narrowing. There was something about her, something that made him want to believe. But he couldn't. He had been betrayed too many times to let his guard down. Still, the flicker of something inside him wouldn't go away. "Fine," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll help you. But understand this, I don't do anything for free. If you want my help, you'll owe me, and I always collect on my debts." Isolde nodded, not flinching. "I understand." As the two of them stood in the dim light of the room, the weight of the world pressed upon them. Neither of them knew the full extent of what they were about to unleash, but they both felt it. The pull of fate. The promise of vengeance and the strange, undeniable connection that was beginning to form between them. Dante turned away, his mind already turning to plans and bloodshed. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the thought of Isolde's words. "I know the pain of betrayal." And for the first time in years, Dante wondered if he could ever forgive himself for the betrayal he had suffered, and if this woman might just be the one to help him find redemption. Cliffhanger. Dante turned to leave the room, but before he could open the door, Isolde called out to him. "Dante." "Wait," he paused but didn't turn around. "What now? Who the fuck did this to you?" she asked, her voice softer than before, yet filled with a kind of understanding he hadn't expected. Dante stood still for a moment, and then for the first time in years he allowed himself to answer. "I'll show you." Dante's mansion stood on the outskirts of the city, a towering fortress of stone and shadow. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood and smoke from the crackling fire in the hearth. Outside, the world had fallen into a deep, unsettling silence, the kind that only comes when danger is near. And Dante could feel it. He always could. Isolde had arrived at his doorstep seeking justice, but Dante knew better than to believe in simple promises. There was always a price. There always was. He hadn't expected to feel the stirrings of something more, but there it was. The memory of her words, her fierce gaze, the soft plea hidden behind her defiance. It lingered in his mind, despite his best efforts to push it away. He didn't have the luxury of weakness. Not anymore. Isolde was no fool. She was playing a dangerous game, and Dante had seen it 1,000 times before. Power, revenge, and the inevitable crash that came when the truth was exposed. But there was something about her. Something that stirred something deep within him. She had asked him to help her find the truth, to expose the ones who had destroyed her family. And now, Dante was faced with the very thing he had avoided for years, confronting the past he thought was buried forever. Dante stood in his study, the room dimly lit by the glow of the fire, his fingers brushing over the worn edges of an old map. It showed the kingdom, the land he once ruled, a land now filled with shadows and betrayal. The royal family was gone, destroyed by enemies both within and outside their walls, but the power that had torn his life apart was still out there, lurking in the shadows. He traced his finger over the kingdom's borders. His brother, Lucian, had been the rightful heir, but Lucian was dead, killed under mysterious circumstances that Dante had never fully understood. The betrayal had been swift, merciless, and Dante had paid the price for it. He had been cast out, left to wander in the dark corners of the kingdom, forgotten by those who had once called him prince. Isolde's presence in his life had reignited a spark of something Dante thought he had buried, the desire for justice. But he couldn't afford to care. Not about her. Not about anything but his empire. But then there were her eyes. Dante slammed his hand against the map, shaking himself out of his thoughts. He couldn't afford distractions. "You should be careful with her," a voice suddenly said from the shadows. Dante turned to see his trusted lieutenant, Aldrich, stepping forward, his face grim. Aldrich was a man as cold as Dante himself, but even he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. "I know what you're thinking," Aldrich continued. "She's a pawn in a much larger game, Dante. Don't forget that." "I'm not forgetting anything," Dante muttered, but the unease in his voice betrayed him. He had been careful with his feelings, careful not to let anything distract him from his goal. But Isolde had a way of slipping past his defenses. "Are you sure about her?" Aldrich asked, his voice dropping lower. "She might be more dangerous than you think." Dante didn't respond. He didn't need to. He already knew the dangers of trusting anyone. He had learned that the hard way. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the walls. Dante turned his back to Aldrich, his eyes scanning the darkness outside the window. "I'll find the ones who did this to me," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. Aldrich didn't argue. Instead, he bowed his head slightly and left the room, leaving Dante alone with his thoughts. The next morning, Dante met with Isolde in a small, dimly lit room at the far corner of his mansion. The walls were lined with old books and maps, remnants of a time when he had once dreamed of ruling a kingdom. Now all that was left was a dark, cold mansion filled with secrets and shadows. Isolde sat at the wooden table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her dark eyes were calm, but there was a fire in them that Dante couldn't ignore. She wasn't the type of woman to be easily intimidated, not even by someone like him. "I've been thinking about your request," Dante said, his voice low and steady. Isolde met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "And I want answers," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But I need to know more about who I'm dealing with. Who are these people who destroyed your family?" Isolde hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "It's not just a matter of revenge," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's about a curse. The royal family has always had enemies, but the curse that haunts us, it's what led to our downfall." Dante leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. A curse? He had heard rumors of dark magic, of witches and sorcerers who could twist fate itself, but he had never believed in such things. Still, there was something about Isolde's tone that made him listen. "The curse," she continued, "was placed on my family centuries ago. It was said to be the work of a powerful sorcerer who wanted to take control of the kingdom. He cursed my bloodline, ensuring that no heir would ever live to see the throne." Dante's mind raced as he processed her words. A curse, a bloodline cursed to never rule. The very idea seemed impossible. And yet here she was, telling him this story like it was fact. "So, the ones who killed your parents?" Dante began, his voice trailing off. "They are the ones who are after me now," Isolde finished. "The sorcerer's followers. They believe that by using me, they can bring the curse to life once more, and if they succeed, they will have the power to rule the entire kingdom." Dante leaned back in his chair, considering her words. A curse, dark magic. It sounded like a fairy tale. But Dante knew better than anyone that fairy tales were often rooted in truth. The world he lived in was filled with shadows and magic had a way of slipping through the cracks. "And you think I can help you stop them?" Dante asked, his voice heavy with doubt. Isolde nodded. "I know you can. You're the only one who can." Dante's eyes narrowed. The weight of her words pressed on him. He wasn't sure what he expected when he agreed to help her, but it hadn't been this. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something much larger, something that could change everything. Before Dante could respond, the door to the room swung open and Aldrich entered, his face pale and strained. "Dante," Aldrich said urgently. "We've found them." Dante's heart skipped a beat. The ones who had destroyed his life. The ones who had hurt Isolde. "Where?" Dante asked, his voice cold as ice. "They're hiding in the old ruins," Aldrich said. "It's a safe house, but not for long. We've got a small window before they move again." Dante stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He turned to Isolde. "Stay here. It's too dangerous." But Isolde was already on her feet, her eyes burning with determination. "I'm coming with you." Dante's gaze hardened, but he didn't argue. She wasn't going to stay behind, not when she had already come this far. Fine, he said, his voice low. But if you get in my way, I'll leave you behind. Isolde didn't flinch. You won't, cliffhanger. The two of them headed out, their steps quick and deliberate. The sky had darkened as they reached the ruins, an old stone fortress that had been abandoned long ago. But as they approached, a low echoing laugh rang out from within the darkness of the ruins. Did you think you could escape us? The voice taunted. Dante's hand went to the hilt of his sword, his muscles tense, and then a figure stepped out from the shadows. A figure Dante hadn't seen in years, a figure who was supposed to be dead. Lucian, Dante whispered, his heart stopping in his chest. Dante stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest as the figure emerged from the shadows. The world seemed to slow, the wind picking up only to be drowned out by the thundering beat of his pulse. His eyes locked onto the man before him, the man who should have been dead. His brother, Lucian. But it wasn't just Lucian standing before him. It was a ghost, a reminder of the life Dante had lost, a life he had fought to forget. The man before him was too real, too alive to be a mere illusion, yet the sight of him felt like a nightmare. Lucian, Dante whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Lucian's face was unchanged, though there was a coldness in his eyes that Dante didn't recognize. His once bright, warm eyes had been replaced with something darker, something full of rage and bitterness. Dante, Lucian replied, his voice like the scrape of metal on stone. I didn't think you'd come. But then again, you were always too stubborn for your own good. The air between them grew thick with tension, as if the very ground beneath their feet could crack from the weight of their unspoken history. Isolde, standing behind Dante, looked between the two men, her brow furrowed in confusion. She didn't understand the depth of what was happening, but she could feel it. The invisible wall that had suddenly risen between them, a wall built from years of lies and betrayal. Why are you here, Lucian? Dante asked, his voice low and controlled, though the rawness beneath it was undeniable. You died. I saw you die. Lucian's lips twisted into a bitter smile, a smile that spoke of nothing but anger and pain. Died? No, Dante, I was never dead. Not really. I was cast aside, just like you. You always were the golden child. The one they wanted, the one they trusted, but they betrayed us both. Dante felt a sharp pang in his chest. They betrayed us both. The words rang in his ears, and for a brief moment, he was that young prince again. The one who had trusted too easily, the one who had believed in family. But that prince was gone, replaced by a man forged in darkness, a man who knew only how to survive. What happened to you? Dante asked, stepping forward, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. Why would you side with them? With the very people who destroyed everything? Lucian's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Dante saw the real pain in his brother's eyes. You never understood, did you? You were always so focused on your ideals, your honor. But honor doesn't save you when the world turns its back on you. He stepped closer to Dante, his eyes blazing with intensity. I did what I had to do to survive. I made a choice to join them before they could destroy me, too. Dante's hand tightened around his sword. He couldn't let Lucian's words break him. He couldn't let this betrayal tear him apart again. And now? Dante asked, his voice like ice. Now you're one of them? Helping the ones who killed our family? Lucian didn't flinch. I'm not helping them, Dante, I'm using them. I've learned a lot since you left. A lot about power, about how to bend the world to your will. The royal family? They're a joke. A cursed joke. Dante felt his anger rising. This wasn't the brother he had known. This was something else, something twisted, something far removed from the boy he had grown up with. We were family, Dante spat. We were supposed to stick together. You didn't have to choose this. Lucian's laugh was sharp, cruel. Family. You talk about family like it means something. But all they ever did was use us, Dante. They didn't care about us. Not really. There was a long pause, and for a moment the two brothers just stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Isolde watched them both, the weight of the moment heavy on her. She could sense the years of pain, the betrayal and the terrible choices that had shaped them. Dante's grip on his sword loosened, but the anger still smoldered beneath his skin. So what now? You're going to fight me too? You're going to stand in my way and make me believe that you're still my brother? Lucian's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but then the fire returned. You don't get it, Dante. We've been pawned our entire lives. By the royals. By the ones in power. They didn't want us to succeed. They never did. They only wanted us to fight each other while they controlled everything. Dante took a step forward, the distance between them closing. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the weight of the past pulling him in every direction. Lucian, the boy who had been his brother, his ally, was gone. In his place stood a man full of bitterness and rage. "You're right about one thing," Dante said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "They never wanted us to succeed. But I'm done with their games. I'm done with the lies." Lucian's gaze softened just for a moment. "Then you'll understand why I did what I did." Before Dante could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the air. Both brothers turned their heads to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a tall and imposing figure cloaked in dark robes. The man's face was hidden, but his presence was unmistakable. He radiated power, a cold, suffocating power. "I see the reunion is going well," the figure said, his voice smooth and cold. "But it's time to stop pretending you have a choice." Dante tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his blade again. Lucian's eyes flickered to the man, and for the first time there was a flash of uncertainty in his gaze. "Who are you?" Dante demanded, his voice a low growl. The figure stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a face that was both familiar and strange. It was Thorn, a sorcerer who had once been a trusted ally to the royal family. He was the one who had cast the curse on the kingdom, the one who had twisted the fate of the royal bloodline. Thorn's smile was predatory, his eyes cold as ice. "You really think you can break the curse, Dante? You really think you can undo what's been done?" Dante's heart sank. The sorcerer had always been a shadow in the kingdom, a man whose power was whispered about in the darkest corners of the land. Now standing before him, Dante felt the weight of his words. "You've been playing this game for far too long, Dante," Thorn continued, his voice thick with amusement. "And now you're going to pay the price." Lucian stepped forward, his voice firm. "You don't understand, Dante. This is bigger than us. This is bigger than the kingdom. It's about power. It's about control." Dante shook his head, the anger flaring up once again. "I don't want power, Lucian. I never did. But I will bring down anyone who stands in my way, including you." Isolde, who had been standing silently behind Dante, stepped forward. Her eyes met Thorn's, and for a moment Dante saw a flash of fear in her gaze, but it was quickly replaced with determination. "I won't let you destroy him," she said, her voice steady but fierce. Thorn chuckled, the sound dark and hollow. "You think you can stop me, girl? You don't even know what you're dealing with." Lucian's gaze shifted between the two of them, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "We can't fight him." "Not directly. Not yet." Dante looked at his brother, at the man he once knew, and for the first time in years he felt a strange sense of pity. Lucian had become a prisoner of his own choices, and Thorn, the sorcerer, was pulling the strings. Cliffhanger. The tension in the air grew thicker as the sorcerer stepped closer, his dark presence wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. "You've both made your choices," Thorn said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But now the real game begins. The kingdom is mine, and no one, not even you, Dante, can stop what's coming." Dante felt a surge of dread course through him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone. As the first spark of magic crackled in the air, he knew the battle for the kingdom had just begun. Dante's grip tightened around the hilt of his sword as the air seemed to hum with dark energy. Thorn's presence was suffocating, like a heavy fog that filled every inch of the ruins around them. His cold smile stretched across his face, but there was no warmth in it, just the promise of destruction. Lucian stood by his side, his posture tense, his hands clenched at his sides. The two brothers, once united by blood and bond, now stood on opposite sides of a war neither had chosen, but both were trapped in. "You're too late," Thorn said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to echo in the air. "The curse is already in motion. The power I have now, it's beyond your comprehension." Dante's eyes never left the sorcerer. "You've been playing with things you don't understand, Thorn," he said, his voice steady despite the danger pressing in on him. "And now you've crossed the line." Thorn chuckled softly, almost as if amused by Dante's words. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about me. This is about something much bigger than any of us, a power that has been buried for centuries. The curse that binds your bloodline. It will destroy everything you've ever known." Dante's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't let Thorn see his fear. He couldn't let him see how much his words cut through him. The curse. The very curse that had destroyed his family. The one that still haunted him? What are you talking about? Isolde demanded, stepping forward, her eyes locked onto Thorn. The curse! What does it mean for us? Thorn's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment Dante saw a flicker of recognition in the sorcerer's eyes. Ah, the princess. The last of the royal bloodline. He looked at her with a mixture of disdain and something darker. You think you can stop this, don't you? But you're just a pawn in a game you'll never understand. Isolde's face hardened. I'll never be your pawn. Not now, not ever. Thorn smiled, but there was no humor in it. We'll see about that. Suddenly, the air around them seemed to change. A sharp, biting wind swept through the ruins, causing the trees to shake and the ground beneath their feet to tremble. Dante felt it before he saw it, the magic. The dark magic that was creeping through the earth, pulsing with malevolent power. He could feel it in his bones, the very essence of it sinking into his skin, making his heart race. Lucian, stop this, Dante said, his voice low but firm. This isn't you. This isn't who we were. You're not like him. Lucian's eyes flickered with something, guilt perhaps, but it was quickly masked by the same coldness that had settled over him since their separation. You don't understand, Dante. I've seen the truth. I've seen the power that Thorn holds. I've seen what we can become, and what is that? Dante asked, his voice tight with frustration. A puppet? A shadow of the man you used to be? Lucian took a step forward, his eyes dark with an intensity that sent a shiver down Dante's spine. I've made my choices, just like you've made yours. You think you can fix everything? You can't. The world isn't the way it used to be. There's no room for honor anymore. Only power. Dante took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. And that's what you're fighting for, power? Lucian's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Power is all that matters. It always has been. Before Dante could respond, Thorn raised his hand and the ground beneath them cracked open. A blast of dark energy shot toward them, sending dust and debris flying into the air. Dante barely had time to react. Throwing himself to the side, the magic grazing his shoulder. He felt a sharp sting, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the fight at hand. Isolde, stay back, Dante shouted, his eyes locking onto her as she moved toward the chaos. He didn't want her anywhere near this fight. He couldn't bear the thought of her being caught in the crossfire, but she didn't listen. Instead, she stepped forward, her hand glowing faintly with the magic she had inherited from her bloodline. The light was soft, but it was powerful, a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. I'm not afraid of you, Thorn, Isolde said, her voice unwavering. You're not the only one with power. Thorn's eyes narrowed as he saw the glow of her magic. He raised his hand again, but this time the air around them began to shimmer. A barrier of dark energy surrounded him, blocking any attempts to attack. Thorn's smile returned, but it was colder than ever. Foolish girl, he sneered. You don't even know the true nature of your own magic. You're nothing but a vessel, a puppet like the rest of them. Dante's mind raced. He had to act fast. The longer they stood here, the more dangerous this became. The more Thorn's magic corrupted everything around them. The kingdom, their lives, their pasts. It was all slipping through their fingers. He glanced at Lucian, who stood motionless, watching as the two of them faced off against Thorn. There was a flicker of something in Lucian's eyes. Regret, perhaps. But it was too late for regret. Thorn was too far gone. And Lucian? He was lost, Lucian, Dante said, his voice tight with urgency. If you don't stop this now, there will be no going back. Lucian met his gaze for a long moment, and for the briefest second, Dante thought he saw the man he had once called brother. But then Lucian's expression hardened once more. I can't go back, Dante, Lucian replied quietly. Not anymore. Dante's heart sank as the finality of his words hit him. His brother was gone. There was no saving him. And with that realization, a cold fury washed over Dante. He turned toward Thorn, his eyes filled with determination. Then I'll stop you myself. With a battle cry, Dante charged toward the sorcerer, his sword raised high. The dark energy crackled in the air, but Dante didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to, not when the stakes were this high. The battle for the kingdom was beginning, and it would not end until one of them stood victorious. Thorn's eyes narrowed and the ground beneath them cracked open, sending more blasts of dark magic toward Dante. But Dante was faster, ducking and weaving through the air, dodging the blasts with skill honed from years of surviving in the shadows. He was a man born of rage and revenge, and now he was using it all to protect the only thing that mattered. Isolde, standing just behind him, focused her energy on Thorn's barrier, trying to break through it with the magic she had left. She was growing weaker with each passing second, but she refused to give up. She couldn't. Not when everything was on the line. "Dante, hurry," Isolde shouted. "I can't hold it much longer." Dante glanced back at her, fear flashing in his eyes, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. He had to finish this. For both of them. With a roar, Dante lunged forward, his sword aimed directly at Thorn's chest. Cliffhanger. The sword struck, but instead of the satisfying sound of steel meeting flesh, there was an explosion of energy. Thorn's magic erupted in a wave of power, sending Dante flying backward, his body slamming against the stone walls of the ruin. As he lay there, dazed and struggling to breathe, he saw Isolde standing over him, her body glowing with the last of her strength. Her eyes met his, filled with fear and determination. And then, in that final moment, as the air crackled with magic, Dante heard Thorn's voice, cold and cruel. "It's too late. Dante, you've already lost." Dante's head was spinning, his vision blurred as he struggled to push himself upright. The stone wall of the ruined fortress had felt like it had cracked his ribs when he collided with it. His body was bruised, his strength waning, but his resolve remained unbroken. He could hear the distant rumble of thunder in the sky above, the wind whipping through the desolate ruins like an omen. The air felt thick with magic, crackling with dark energy. Thorn's power surrounded them, suffocating them, and Dante knew that time was running out. Isolde was still standing, her eyes glowing with the faint light of the magic she was struggling to control. Her face was pale, her body trembling with exhaustion, but she held her ground. She wouldn't give up, not now. Not when everything they had fought for hung in the balance. Thorn stood across from them, a smug smile playing at the corners of his lips. His dark eyes gleamed with triumph as he surveyed the chaos he had wrought. The air around him shimmered with the raw power of his magic, a power that was bending reality itself. "You're pathetic," Thorn sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can defeat me? You're nothing but insects scurrying around in the shadows." Dante pushed himself up, his legs unsteady, but he refused to fall. "You're wrong, Thorn," he growled, his voice raw but defiant. "You've made a mistake. You think you're the only one who understands power, but you don't." Isolde stepped forward, her eyes locked on Thorn. "You think you can break us? You think you can control us? You've underestimated us." Thorn's expression darkened, but the arrogance in his voice never wavered. "You think you're special, Isolde? You think you're some kind of savior? You're nothing, just a pawn in a game you don't understand." Dante stepped forward, his sword raised high despite the weakness in his limbs. "I don't need to understand your magic, Thorn," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I don't need to understand the curse. What I understand is fighting for what's mine, and you've crossed the line." The sorcerer laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the ruins. "You still don't get it. This isn't about power, Dante, it's about fate. And fate is already decided." Dante's heart raced, but he didn't let the fear show. He couldn't, not now. Fate doesn't control me. It never has." Thorn's smile faded as he raised his hand, dark energy swirling around his fingertips. "Then you'll die for it," he said, his voice a hiss. Before Dante could react, Thorn unleashed a wave of magic, sending a blast of energy toward him. Dante barely had time to react, raising his sword to deflect the attack. The impact sent him sprawling backward, his sword flying from his grasp. He hit the ground hard, the world spinning around him. "Dante!" Isolde screamed. But before she could move to his side, Thorn's magic whipped around her, binding her to the ground. She struggled against it, her hands glowing with magic, but the power was too much for her. "No!" Dante shouted, pushing himself to his knees, but he was too slow. The sorcerer's power was overwhelming, closing in on them from all sides. Thorn's voice rang out like a cruel mockery. "You think you can stop me? The curse has already been set in motion. There's nothing you can do to undo it. Nothing anyone can do." Dante's vision blurred as he fought to get to his feet. He had to save her. He had to save them both. He couldn't let Thorn win, but the weight of the magic around him was too much. His body was weak, his strength slipping away. He could feel the cold, dark energy surrounding him, seeping into his very soul. The curse was coming for him, and he could feel it like an anchor pulling him down. Isolde was still fighting, her magic flickering like a dying flame, but it wasn't enough. Thorn's magic was too strong. He was too strong. Dante closed his eyes for a moment, the darkness closing in on him, but then something stirred inside him, a spark. A flame that had been buried deep within him for so long. The anger, the rage, the refusal to lose. "I won't let you do this," Dante whispered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. He could feel the power inside him growing, the power that had been lying dormant for years. He didn't know where it came from. Perhaps it was the curse, or perhaps it was the desperation to protect Isolde, to protect the kingdom, but whatever it was awakening. Isolde's voice reached him, faint but filled with strength. "Dante, you have to fight. Fight for us. Fight for everything." Her words pierced through the fog of magic, cutting through the suffocating darkness surrounding them. Dante opened his eyes, and this time there was no fear. There was only fire. He raised his hand and the magic inside him surged to the surface. The energy around him cracked, the air vibrating with power. Thorn looked momentarily surprised as the magic shifted, as Dante's will bent reality to his own command. "You're a fool," Thorn spat. But his confidence wavered as the power radiating from Dante grew stronger. Dante's vision sharpened, his senses focused. He could feel the pulse of the magic now, the flow of energy that connected everything, the curse, the land, and the people. It was all intertwined, all connected, and he realized that this was his moment, his one chance to take control. "Not anymore," Dante said, his voice like thunder. "I don't fight for revenge. I don't fight for power. I fight for them, for what's worth saving." With a roar, he slammed his palm to the ground and the magic surged from him like a tidal wave. The very earth trembled beneath their feet, and Thorn's barrier cracked, splintered by the force of Dante's power. The sorcerer's eyes widened in shock as his magic faltered, his confidence slipping. No, this can't be, but it was too late. Dante's magic engulfed Thorn's dark energy, overpowering it. The sorcerer screamed as the very magic that had once bound him to power was torn apart by the force of Dante's will. In one final, crushing moment, Thorn's power shattered, and the sorcerer fell to his knees, defeated. Cliffhanger. Dante stood in the center of the ruins, breathing heavily, his body trembling from the immense strain. The ground beneath him still quaked with the residual energy. But the battle was over. The curse had been broken, and the kingdom was free of the sorcerer's grasp. But as Dante turned to face Isolde, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. She was standing there, but she was not alone. The light from her magic was flickering, and her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and something else. "Isolde." Dante's voice was rough, a sense of dread creeping into his heart. Isolde's hand went to her chest, and her expression shifted. It wasn't fear. It was something far worse. I can feel it," she whispered. "The curse. It's not gone." Dante's blood ran cold as the ground beneath them trembled once more. A new force was rising. A force they had not anticipated. And this time it wasn't just Thorn they had to fear.